Hey Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We do all manner of dorkly things here, so whether that be superheroes, sci-fi, fantasy, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today, we are doing another installment in our Dork Lord of the Rings segment. Now, in a previous video, I talked about the most important character from the books that was left out of the movies. That was Tom Bombadil, in my opinion. Today, I'm going to talk about the most important chapter from the books left out of the movies. And that would be the Scouring of the Shire. It takes place at the end of Return of the King. Essentially the end of the books, basically. So, you could see why Peter Jackson may have left it out, right? I mean, there's this climactic moment where the ring is destroyed, and Aragorn is crowned king, and it's this big, huge, momentous end of the Third Age type stuff, to then go to this small scale battle involving, not tens of thousands of soldiers, but a couple of hundred. It feels like a smaller ending. It's an odd beat. But I would argue, and we'll talk about the Scouring of Shire and what it means in a second, but I would argue that it's important for that hero's journey, that what Joseph Campbell talks about in The Hero Has a Thousand Faces, the idea that the hero starts in his home, he leaves home, becomes a hero, transforms him or herself, and then returns as a transformed person back to their home. And this is what that chapter does for Frodo. Think about a video we recently did for Star Trek Discovery. It was an episode called Calypso, and it had a lot of Greek mythology references in it. We talked about Odysseus. Odysseus is a good example of that hero's journey. He leaves his home, has all of these heroic trials and tribulations, finally manages to return home as a transformed person and reunites with his true love, Penelope. And so that's the ending beat there. So that's what the Scouring of the Shire does, in my opinion. The movies maybe don't have that flavor quite. So what is the Scouring of the Shire? All right, the war's over. The rings have been destroyed. Sauron's destroyed. Aragorn becomes king, and everybody is now returning home victorious from the war. Our four Hobbit heroes, Merry, Pippin, Sam, Frodo, they're all returning back to the Shire. On their journey for a while, Gandalf is with them. But just before they get all the way to the Shire, Gandalf leaves their company, actually to go talk to Tom Bombadil. We don't know what they talked about, but boy, I would really like to know that conversation. The post-war conversation between Gandalf and Tom. It's for another theory video for another day. In any case, it is up to Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin to make that final journey back home on their own. They arrive at the Shire to find a completely different place. So, in their absence, Lotho Sackville Baggins, we always hear about the Sackville Bagginses being kind of the shady jerks of the Baggins family. Well, Lotho fits the bill. Lotho is selling pipeweed, Longbottom Leaf, to Saruman and Isengard in general. And if you remember, back at the, when Isengard is destroyed and Merry and Pippin are going through the storehouses at Isengard, they find barrels of Longbottom Leaf, and they're kind of surprised, like, man, where did these come from? That's where they came from. Lotho Sackville Baggins making a pretty penny selling Longbottom Leaf to Isengard. Okay, he uses that money to buy up a bunch of land around the Shire and the East Farthing, and sets up a base of operations, essentially, at Bag End. He calls himself the boss, and he's running things, and he starts industrializing the Shire. There's a giant mill comes in, like one of those old gritty, grimy, everything, all the agrarian splendor of the Shire starts to go away. Trees are taken down, mills are built up in their place. It's becoming an industrial society. And obviously we know how Tolkien felt about that. He was not in favor of industrialization at all. And I think in this case, he's using this as an example of saying, oh, this is my England I remember as a boy is being taken over by the industrialization that ruins these beautiful agrarian societies. So the hobbits show up. Ouch, our home is under threat. So actually what's happened though, Lotho is no longer in charge. He was in charge, or thought he was in charge, until Saruman shows up. Grima Wormtongue and Saruman have escaped from Isengard, and this is where they set up shop. Grima Wormtongue kills Lotho in his sleep. There's even some reference, I believe, to the possibility that Grima actually ate Lotho. I don't know that there's enough evidence of that, but in any case, Lotho's dead. And Saruman takes up residence in Bag End and starts running things. In fact, he goes by the name of Sharky instead of Saruman, which makes him sound like he's a gangster. I don't know, he's got a pinstripe suit, spats, but in any case, Sharky and Grima Wormtongue are running things. He brings in a bunch of, I think they're called ruffians in the book, but they're Dunlendings and some half-orcs. So very, tall humanoids kind of run the place in Hobbiton and the Shire in general. Frodo and the company confront some of the ruffians and are like, hey, we don't like what's going on here. And they basically start a revolution. So they rally the hobbits to their banner, basically. And there's a war. It's the Battle of Bywater. And this is actually the last official battle of the War of the Ring. It happens in the Shire, fittingly enough, right? Everything starts in the Shire and it ends in the Shire. It's that what I was talking about, that hero's journey. Circular, like a ring. Anyway, okay. So, the Battle of Bywater. Pippin pretty much takes kind of tactical control of this battle, and he's still technically a knight of Gondor. Aragorn doesn't release him from his service. Remember, he pledged himself to Denethor back in the day. Now that the war's over, he has not been released, but Aragorn puts him on indefinite leave, basically. So in some ways, Pippin is still acting on behalf of Gondor and Aragorn. But he creates some pretty cool tactics. It's like he boxes in the enemy with wagons, and then they use arrows, and they decimate the ruffians. I believe the losses were 19 hobbits are killed, so there's losses, but about 70. I think there's 70 ruffians are killed, and then there's a significant number that are also imprisoned. So it's a pretty convincing victory for the hobbits. Interestingly, Frodo does not really participate in the battle. I think his time with, being a ring bearer and then destroying the ring and seeing how, instead of wielding this weapon for destructive purposes, he gets rid of it and sees that as a value. I think he's become a pacifist. And it would be weird if suddenly he's like this big fighter guy at the end of all this. So it makes sense in his character that he's a pacifist, and what he does is he makes sure that any ruffians, any of the humans that surrender in the battle are not killed. And he's also makes sure that any of the hobbits that helped the ruffians at some point, helped the humans, are also not killed out of some kind of retribution. So battle ends victorious. The group all now go to Bag End to confront Sharky, Saruman, and it's Frodo that does the talking. So Frodo confronts Saruman basically on the stoop of Bag End, and they're having it out in this war of words. While they're arguing, Saruman kind of derisively kicks Grima. Grima snaps, takes out a dagger, and slits Saruman's throat right there on the stoop of Bag End. That's a hostile act. He's got his dagger out, and some of the hobbits see that as a hostile act, and they shoot him. So Grima kills Saruman and then is himself shot to death by arrows on the stoop of Bag End. If you think about Bag End, really, I didn't really think about this, but it's really been the nexus point for many of the influential people and events that shape the Third Age. I mean, obviously Bilbo and Frodo, both ring bearers, lived there. The ring was there for several years. Gandalf has passed through its door. Thorin has passed through its door. Balin has passed through its door, which of course then he led the company to Moria, and that whole side of history. Gimli's dad Glóin was there as well, so in some ways that affects that part of the story. I'm missing some things, I'm sure. Well, Saruman dies right there. Grima dies right there. So there's a lot of the Third Age that is wrapped up on this little doorstep at Bag End, which I'm sure is not by accident in Tolkien's mind. So the hobbits reclaim their home. Interestingly, too, Sam uses the gift he got from Galadriel. The gift he got was a box that had soil in it from Lothlorien, and it had one seed in it from a Malorn tree. Now, the Malorn trees are the giant trees that grow in Lothlorien, right? And that's pretty much the only place they grow. So what Sam does is he goes, all the trees that were destroyed by the industrialization of Lothal, Sackville Baggins, he plants saplings in all those places, and he takes a little pinch of dirt, soil from from Galadriel, and he uses that to plant each of these saplings, and they grow, big and strong, and are much faster than they would typically grow. And in no time at all, he's got the place looking like the Shire again. And for that Malorn tree seed, he plants it at the spot where the party tree had been. Remember, the party tree is at the very beginning of Fellowship of the Ring when Bilbo has his going away party. He does it under the party tree. Giant tree in the middle of town, basically. That tree got cut down. And so it is replaced by this beautiful Malorn tree, which, again, it's the only Malorn tree west of the mountains. So in this whole area, you wouldn't ever see it. It's so out of place, but there it is, growing in the heart of the Shire, and it evokes a lot of what they went through, right? I think it's really, really cool that this Malorn tree becomes the central feature of the Shire. So Peter Jackson decided to leave that out just for time's sake, I assume. He does make reference to, if you remember when Sam is looking in the mirror of Galadriel, the Fellowship of the Ring, he looks into the mirror and he sees the Shire being, it's burning, he's in chains, there's orcs with whips, and he's seeing that the Shire is under threat. I think what Peter Jackson is saying is that's a possible future that did not come about, as it turned out, due to the destruction of the ring and such. And Peter Jackson also does, in an extended scene, he does have Grima kill Saruman and then Grima be shot by arrows. I think it's Legolas that shoots him. So he, in some ways, pays homage to Saruman's death in the Scouring of the Shire in an extended scene. But he does not actually, as you remember, when Frodo and them go back home, the Shire is essentially the same as it always was. It was untouched by the war. But it doesn't make you think, too, like, if everything else had gone the same, in terms of the War of the Ring is destroyed, Aragorn is king, and Gandalf does his thing, and everything else is the same, except that instead of Frodo being the ring bearer, maybe at the Council of Elrond says, Gimli and Legolas, you two shall destroy the ring. And Gimli and Legolas go off and successfully throw the ring into the fire. And everything else happened the same. So there would be a victory. The War of the Ring, yay, we won. The Shire would still have been destroyed, basically, turned into this industrial cesspool for years, because Frodo and company would not have had the skill set and the life experience to be able to handle this threat to their home. So in some ways, it is going off to war, going off to throw the ring into the fire and deal with all the obstacles they dealt with, transforms them so that when they come back home, they are able to save their home, essentially. And so that's the transformative power of the story, I think, is really, really cool and really caught up in that moment. So yeah, there you go. The Scouring of the Shire. It's a smaller story than the giant, world-changing events of the War of the Ring, but I do feel like it is an important, period on the end of Frodo's story. So anyway, there you have it, everybody. Feel free to subscribe, hit like if you liked this video. If you've got an idea for another topic to do these Dork Lord of the Rings segments, feel free to put it in the comments. I would love to discuss a topic of your choosing. So anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. Bye now.